All right. So we are this is the second week of our giving series, and we're going to talk about Luke 19, 1 to 10, which is a familiar story for most people who, grew up in church. It's Jesus and Zacchaeus. So we're going to look at it from the perspective of look at Zacchaeus' giving from the perspective of having a transformative encounter with Jesus. And that being the spur. Last week we did the widow and her two copper coins. KJV calls it the widow's mite. It's kind of, but that's she gave as an act of faith and trust. And so now we're going to look at giving as an act in response to transformation. So Luke 19, 1 to 10 says, he entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. All who saw it began to grumble and said, he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. Then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost. All right. Now, this story is far more than the children's song that bears this, that is based on this text. The children's song, yes, it helps, know the main gist of the story and who Zacchaeus is and what God does for him and what Jesus does for him and what he does in response. The words that have jumped out for me in this text is the verb. It's translated several different ways, but it's the verb to see. Zacchaeus is trying to see who Jesus is, but he can't see because of the crowd. So he climbs a sycamore tree to try to see him. Jesus comes to that place and he looks up. It's a similar word there. And the people see, or they saw what happened. And then Zacchaeus says, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. So there's this idea of this undercurrent of sight that is going on in this passage. Now, if you just go back up to the previous paragraph at the end of chapter 18, you'll see that Jesus performs a miracle about a man who is blind. And notice, so he asks, so in Mark's gospel, this blind beggar is named Bartimaeus. He's unnamed in Matthew and Luke. But here, Jesus asks him, what do you want me to do for you? And he says, Lord, let me see again. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight. So there's this, this idea, continuation of sight. Immediately he regained his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, they praised God. So, and this takes place in Jericho as well. So the people of Jericho have witnessed these two scenes, hopefully. And one is a blind man who's begging, who would be by his very nature on the outskirts because he has that handicap of being blind. He would have been overlooked by people. He would have been pushed aside. And even he was hushed, by the crowd. But then when Jesus calls out to him, then they, incorporate him. So then they see. So then Jesus enters Jericho, he's passing through it, and then we have Zacchaeus, who wants to see Jesus. He has sight already. He wants to see Jesus to know who he is, but he can't because he's, the way that's translated is that he's short in stature. Interestingly enough, that verb or that noun can also be, or that adjective can be translated also as young. And there are, it only occurs about 6 or 7 times in the New Testament. And this is the only place where it deals with height. Most of the time it deals with age. Just throwing that out there. Now, for him to be a chief tax collector, I don't, in my reading of it, I don't see how he could be, how he could be like so young that he's short because he hasn't grown enough. So I tend to lean more towards the short in stature kind of thing rather than the young part. But it's just an interesting little part of the original language. So he's the chief tax collector, which means that he's the boss and he has other people working for him who collect taxes from people, and then he makes a profit off of what they make a profit off of. And so when he comes and says, you know, if I've defrauded anybody, then I'll pay that back. You know, that's probably you know, sort of that skimming off the top kind of thing. So Zacchaeus has, he's the chief tax collector. So that's strike one. He is rich, and because of that, that's a mix. You know, sometimes rich people are, you know, are looked at well, but sometimes not. But he's also he's short, so he's got that going against him. He's also willing to embarrass himself by climbing up this tree to get. It's just, you know, depending on which commentator you read, some will, you know, some sort of parallel it to like Luke 15, where the father runs to the son, the prodigal, and looks at that as sort of a, you know, respectable men don't run. It's like, well, I don't know. Yes and no. But go ahead.
Oh, I'll just share a commentary line here. He climbed the tree like a little boy, and without knowing, fulfilled Jesus's word that unless we become like children, we will not see the kingdom of God. He climbed that tree to see the God.
Yeah.
That's another way of looking at it.
Sure. So, so he is, so Zacchaeus is this mixed kind of character, because yeah, he's the chief tax collector. So the ordinary Jews are going to be, you know, upset with him because he's making money off of other people who are making money off of them. And he's also in collusion with the Romans because they're the ones that collect the taxes. But Luke describes him as someone who is trying to see who Jesus was. So he is seeking, he is trying to find out who this man is. And he's doing so in a way that is trying to overcome the obstacles that he has. You know, if people are squeezing him out, you know, if the crowd is gathering around on the street where Jesus is walking, and they're forming this wall where they're not letting him through, he finds another way to get to a place where he has a vantage point on Jesus. Now, so I was rereading the text again this morning and praying through it, and one of the things that came to mind was that you know, let me just, I don't want to misquote myself, but you know, I do that all the time. So Zacchaeus is trying to see Jesus, find out more about him. He knew enough to know that some people were starting to talk about him, maybe even the blind man, praising God at the end of chapter 18 had gotten to his ears, and people were perked up and in their interest in who this Jesus was. So he goes and he climbs the tree, and then Jesus sees Zacchaeus in the tree. He looks up. I mean, so it's a physical motion of looking up, and so Jesus knows something about Zacchaeus, and that's his name, because he calls him by name, which is a big deal. So the question I asked myself was, how powerful and shocking would it have been to Zacchaeus that Jesus already knew his name? What might that have meant to Zacchaeus? And what response might it elicit? Fear, awe, wonder, shame, guilt, all these kinds of things. Like, he knows my name. He probably also knows what I do and what I've done. And but when Jesus calls him down from the tree, he comes immediately, and he comes. The word in NRSV is he was happy to welcome him. It's the idea of rejoicing. He's filled with joy in this moment that Jesus wants to come to his house. So Jesus looks up and he sees Zacchaeus, calls him by name, and invites himself to Zacchaeus's house, which is a bit of a flip of hospitality rules. Hospitality is a big thing in the first century, and in this kind of culture, and still is. I wonder if the crowd, if they didn't just grumble about the fact that Zacchaeus is a sinner, but that Jesus invited himself to. But that's for further conversation later. So Zacchaeus hurries down. He's happy to welcome him. He takes him to his home, and all who saw it, this is verse 7, began to grumble. There's this sense of, the crowd starts, and they said, the specific line is that he has gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner, because they know what he does. They know who he is too, and they know he got rich off of their backs, basically. And so out of that moment, Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor." So he takes whatever his pile of possessions is, and he says half of it goes, he gives it away immediately. And then he says, if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I'll pay back 4 times as much. So he takes that other half and he says, I'll pay back 4 times as much as I defrauded anybody with this other half. So his pile of riches, or whatever, if you want to think about it that way, has been cut in half, and then basically, if you want to think about it, it's been decimated, so that he has very little left, which puts him on almost on the same level as all of the people whom he's collected taxes from. He's no longer what we would call rich. He's given away and paid back the things that he's accumulated over the years. And so Jesus says, today salvation has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. And we can run over this verse real quick and think of it just spiritually, which is fine. It's fine level to look at this verse. But if we acknowledge who Jesus is and what Jesus is there to do, then what if Jesus is using the word salvation metaphorically to talk about himself? And that salvation himself has come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. He knows who Zacchaeus is. He knows that he's Jewish. He knows that he's part of the family. And so he's stating it for those who are gathered around, to remind them that, you may not like him, or you may not like what he does, but he's part of the family, and he's not to be cast out. Then verse 10 says, "For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." And there's that word again, that seeking, looking for. It's an intense verb. It's like he's seeking, he's looking intently at what's in front of him, and what's to come. It's the same way as in verse 3, where Zacchaeus was intently looking for Jesus. So again, the theological and spiritual side of salvation is obviously the idea of being restored, being set free, that we think of as salvation, being set free from the bondage. Now, I am fairly certain that whichever commentator you end up reading, they will draw the parallels between this passage and the rich young ruler, and look at how these two rich men behave in opposite ways. So I think that's a worthwhile conversation for you to have as a class, is to look at, okay, the rich young ruler, was asked, or was told, go and give away everything you have, sell it, give it to the poor, and then come follow me. Whereas Zacchaeus, without even being asked, gives away half and then pays back 4 times, and ends up essentially doing that. And then Jesus says, salvation has come to this house, and the fulfillment of what he asked the rich young ruler to do. So let's see. Okay. Let me think. Oh, so, okay. The other thing that jumped out at me, and again, you have to read back into the end of chapter 18, is the difference in the way that the crowd responds to what's taking place. The crowd grumbles at Jesus and Zacchaeus, making their way to Zacchaeus's house, but they praise God for this blind man who has received his sight. So let's see. They grumble, they complain, they murmur. They're in disbelief that the teacher wants to associate with quote unquote sinners. And yet these are the very people Jesus most closely serves when he goes, which is wherever he goes, which is the least and the last and the lost. That's who Jesus goes for, especially in the Gospel of Luke. These people that are labeled sinners. So I wrote, if the people of Jericho haven't heard that by now, then maybe they're not paying attention to what Jesus is doing. Maybe they missed what happened at the end, earlier in the day or the day before, when Jesus got to town. Because most likely in a town, even of Jericho's size, no, there's not a 24-hour news channel, but it's not a big enough place where something like a blind man being healed isn't going to spread like wildfire, especially if he's going out and proclaiming all the things. So they most likely have heard it, and that's most likely why they're gathered here in this scene to see what's going on with this guy. And while I don't like jumping gospels, one to another, there's a scene in the entirety of John chapter 9 is this sight versus blind, who sees, who doesn't, and the man born blind, why is he blind? Did he sin? And then Jesus comes around, and basically it's like maybe people who can see physically can't see spiritually. Anyway, That may be a stretch for this particular passage, but it's it reminded me. I wrote down, why were they out on the street as Jesus was passing by? What did they come to see? It reminded me of Jesus speaking about John the Baptist and going, what did you go out into the desert to see? Did you go to see a prophet? Did you go to see somebody, that was doing something amazing? You went out there for a reason. They were out on the street in Jericho for a reason. And then when they see what happens, they don't really like it. So anyway, but the end, the thing I want to get to is this idea that that Jesus is that Zacchaeus is giving. He's giving because he had a transformative encounter with Christ. I mean, he's not commanded to, like the rich young ruler. He's not giving out of poverty like the woman, the widow from last week. He's looking for Jesus. He responds to what Jesus does. He changes his ways. He immediately makes amends for his behavior. And then I think one of the phrases that I'll probably use is that he no longer repeats the bad patterns of his life prior to. He makes a new choice. And so and that has applications in all kinds of ways for our life, not just financial. That can come with thinking, and that can come with diet, or it can come with family relations or whatever. But he's making a new start in this, and he says, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I have encountered Christ, therefore I'm going to do something new. He has been made new, and so he's going to do new things. Hope that makes sense. So I've got a story I'm going to share about a guy who was impacted by the ministry of a church that I previously served, and he made a big decision because of that. And I'm let's see what else. Let's what questions do you have, if any? I'll invite Gail up on the stage, and she can sing the song for everybody. I hope she can hear me.
I told her I was going to have you do that. And she's over there going, what?
Yeah.
He says he's going to invite you up to sing the song. Oh. The only other thing I had, and you touched on it, especially verse 10, for the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost. And I see shepherd there. Mm-hmm. That it's just, and also this particular commentary, Jesus knew the importance of a name. He said that he calls his sheep by name. To him, the doorkeeper opens and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name and leads them out.
Right.
Back to John.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah.
So that I like that. And as many times as I've read this, I hadn't read it like I read it for this.
Uh,
And Zacchaeus was always just a wee little man. He wasn't anybody special, and this, that, and the other. And this really brings it home that so many things. We're in Genesis 18 and 19 right now, so we're doing Sodom and Gomorrah, and we've been studying Abraham now for 2 or 3 weeks,
mhm.
and to bring up that he is a son of Abraham
Mhm.
means a lot to me, a lot more to me now than it did before,
Sure.
because of our study of Genesis.
Mhm.
So, yep, like that. Like
Yeah.
it.
Well, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again, that you can't fully understand the New Testament without having at least a baseline understanding of the Old Testament. At least the major characters and the major plot lines, because there's so many allusions or things like this. Son of Abraham. Wait, what does that mean? And you're like, who's Abraham? And then you got to go back and you got to you read that whole story. And the promise of the descendants and everything. So yeah, it's I mean, that's shorthand. Really, it's what it is. It's shorthand for he's one of us, and
Yeah.
and to exclude him is to cut off your nose to spite your face, kind of thing. So
Yep. All right, sir.
very good. All right. Well, next week we'll look at the early church in Acts chapter 2 and how they it's right at the end of Acts chapter 22, Acts 2, where it talks about how they operated as a church, where they all met together, and it's 42 to 47, I think. Acts 2, 42 to 47.
Okay.
And we'll talk about how we operate together as a church, and what the question I'll ask is what can we do together as the Lord blesses our generosity? So how do we come together, and what are we able to accomplish because we do it together rather than on our own?
Now that's for the Acts. That's the question for Acts.
Mhm.
What's the question for this?
Oh, for this
time?
week, is about how have you been changed by Jesus? Is the
Okay.
is the question for this week? Have you been changed by Jesus? Because whether the answer is yes or no, changes the follow up to that. So.
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
Well, all right.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm glad that y'all are feeling better. And
Thank you. And we appreciate it,
Sure.
and hope to see you in person on Sunday.
That'll be great.
Okay.
All right. Take care.
Bye for now.